So yeah, the title I feel is a bit of a mouthful, but what this really is about is this, right? Here we see the revisualized content of a TextBlock tag. It's the same content, the same TextBlock tag. It's but two different ways to visualize it, right? On the left-hand side, it's just a replay of the HTML without any enhancement, without anything. And on the right-hand side, you can see the same, as I said, the same content, but reconstructed faithfully to how it looks in the original report, right? And this really is in Europe for the last year, this has been a lot of a challenge and a lot of discussions between all involved parties, how we can improve and use the content of TextBlock tags. There's a lot of questions here that I will try to answer in this call, in this talk. I think most of you don't need an introduction to how TextBlock tags work, but just a little bit of a refresher for those of you who haven't been obsessing about TextBlock tags as much as, for example, Alex and I during the last 1 or 2 years. So for inline XBRL, you know, if you have a numeric tag here on the left-hand side, the content of the tag is quite easy. It's a number, right? And there's a lot of restrictions on it. You cannot put a lot of things in it. So it's comparatively easy, right? But for TextBlock tags here on the right-hand side, there's a lot of things you can do with it. And also HTML is a language, or is a meta language where you can do a lot of things in different ways and achieve the same outcome, right? So famous example is tables. You can use a table or you cannot, right? I think the key takeaway here is that non-numeric tags, TextBlock tags are way more complex than numeric tags. And especially in Europe, for the first 2 years of the ESEF requirement, we only had the requirement for numeric tags in the primary financial statements. And then in the third year, we got TextBlock tags as mandatory tags as well. And that was last year. I think before we start asking ourselves how the content of TextBlock tags should look like, yeah, you know, the structure and everything, we have to ask ourselves, what are they going to be used for, right? And that's really, we're trying to solve a problem that hasn't really been formulated before trying to solve it, right? And there's, of course, a lot of different ideas. I mean, I think the honest answer is, at least last year, it was, we don't know yet how these are going to be used. I know Paul and Richard are working on a working group note that has 4 use cases, identified 4 use cases for this. The first one would be a simple disclosure checklist where you can use the text block and say, okay, this tag has been tagged in this report, period, right? For that, the content, it doesn't matter what the content is actually. The second would be what is called disclosure, navigation, and highlighting. Then you would go, okay, this has been tagged in this report, and please show me where it is in the report. And you just highlight the content in the original layout of the report, right? The third is a little bit more advanced. It's disclosure text analysis. There you actually need the content of the report to be in some sort of structure that can be analyzed by some processor, for example, right? Machine learning comes to mind here. And the fourth one is the most complicated one, isolated rendering. This is what the right-hand side of the first slide was, where you display the content of one TextBlock text in a faithful representation of how it looks like in the original report. And that, when you come from the US, you think maybe I don't see the problem, but in Europe, things work a little bit differently. I will show you in a few slides where the problem is here. Of course, there's other use cases that you can think about, usage of TextBlock tags. You can use it to compare it between different filers, and there's a lot of AI things you can do. For example, sentiment analysis, right? Like give the text to an AI and it tells you this is a positive outlook on a certain topic or a negative output or something like that, right? And yeah, I mean, creation of summaries, sometimes these text blocks are very long, and if you tell an AI, please give me a quick summary, I don't have the time to read it all, that is also, of course, a use case, right? So, from our experiences in Europe last year, what are the challenges for TextBlock tags in general? These 2 tables are a good example. They are from 2 different reports. On the left-hand side, it's a Finnish report that was originally based on a PDF and then converted to XHTML. We can see the code here on the left-hand side, and if you use this HTML code and just the HTML code that is part of the TextBlock tag and redisplay it without any additional information, you get what you see here in the left-hand lower corner, right? It's not very helpful, I would say. But on the right-hand side, you can see something that where the original report was Word. In Word, you have semantic information, right? You know what a table is, you know what a paragraph is, and you can translate this properly into HTML. We see the code here as well, and we can see the table, the reconstructed table from the HTML content below. But even that's not perfect, right? Because the filers put very much effort into creating their reports, into creating these tables. And if we look at the table at the top, we can see the line that's called Umsatz is bold, right? And next to last column has a red header, because that's content that's important for them to convey to the users of the report. And that's completely lost in the reconstruction of just the HTML report, of just the HTML content here. And it's still a fact in Europe, at least, and also how the requirement was structured, that I think 95% of all reports are based on either PDF or Word, so on page-based report, right? If we look at the other side, the auditors, which at least in Europe, play a big role in this in the discussion. What we can see here again is a big HTML text block tag, just shown without any further enhancement in an audit software, right? We can see here the tables have been highlighted red, but if you just look at it, it's completely chaos, right? And I blurred it because, of course, it's the version of a report that hasn't been published like this. And the reason for why it looks like this is that besides some classes that have been used here, like global CSS style classes, there's also local styles here, as we can see in the code, and that lead to a bit of a chaos in redisplaying these reports. So before we go to what can we do to improve all this, just a little overview over the requirements. I think most of you are very aware of this. TextBlock tag is a non-numeric item. And if we look at the inline specification, it can be any element, any text node, right? So there's not a lot of constraints on it. And the same is also true for the TextBlock item type. It can have mixed content containing a simple string, fragment of XHTML, or both, right? So there's not a lot of limitations here. Then, of course, we have requirements from the regulators. I've picked two examples here. On the left-hand side is the European example, and on the right-hand side, the SEC. And if you look at the pictures from the reports, I think it's already quite apparent that there's a big difference here. So when the ESMA requirement came into force, what they aspire to was that the companies keep the reports that they already have, that are heavily layouted, glossy, that convey the company's CI. Some companies are very proud of how their reports look like. They win prizes with it, right? Keep this report, just make it into inline XBRL. We promise you it's not a lot of work, right? And I mean, transforming these PDFs, mostly, I think more than 50% of the European inline XBRL reports have been based on PDF documents. That in itself is not a lot of a challenge. Although I think most of the companies use the same converter because there's an open source one that's very, very good. But working with the output, because PDF is a fixed format, right? You don't have any semantic information, has been a bit of a struggle. But again, ESMA, the requirements ESMA has, and I want to emphasize the should here, is that content should retain order and legibility, retain spaces, and meaningfully transcribe tables. But should is not a must, right? Should, you can do it, and if you don't do it, you maybe get a warning, but it's fine, right? The only real requirement in Europe is if you have one of these special characters, you need to set escape to true. That's it, right? As far as I know, in the SEC world, they're a little bit more restrictive. You need to have most of the styles inline, which has some advantages and some disadvantages. And also the word must is used a lot more often in the Edgar Filer manual than in the ESMA reporting manual. But on the other side, on the other hand, the reports look a little bit more like forms, right? Like here's an example from the Deutsche Bank report, and they are called forms, Form 20F, right? So I think there's a difference in how the regulators approach the whole thing and how it has been perceived by the market as well. And then our favorite topic, the auditors in Europe have additional requirements because they thought, okay, what is in the specification, the data type, and what the regulator has, it's not enough. We need more rules. And this is in Europe, especially driven by German auditors, and they had an emphasis. So when they figured out that most people use PDF reports to create the XHTML version, and there is no semantic information in there, right? You don't have any table text, you don't have paragraph text, nothing. It's all just divs and spans with a lot of styling. So it looks like tables, for example, but in the HTML, it's not clearly visible, right? It's like we want this to be machine readable in some way, right? Because also opposed to the SEC, where every number has to be tagged. In Europe, you only have to tag every number in the primary financial statements. All the tables in the rest of the report don't have to be detail tagged. So one big thing that was important for the auditors was that every table in a report has to be a table, right? An HTML table with rows and cells and everything, which was a bit of a challenge for our PDF-based solution. But we figured it out somehow in the end. But these requirements from auditors often come very late in the period, and then we have to make changes when we really don't want to make changes to our software anymore, right? And also, again, I'm citing this XBRL International Working Group note from Paul that has not been published yet, but this is the current wording that the usage of HTML text is not something that should be considered good practice. Because while you can, of course, use it for machine readability, but it's a lot more reliable if you just tag everything, right? Detail tagging is the solution here, to have reliable data. One other requirement, which I think makes sense, is that you don't have, at least for Europe, that you don't have any inline styles, like we showed in this one example that looked a bit chaotic. Everything should be a global style, and then it's easier to reconstruct and show the HTML in audit solutions. I think most companies implemented that themselves. Anton, who's sitting there, has implemented an open source solution. So if you don't want to do that yourself, just ask him and he can provide you with a solution. And then we had a lot of discussions about meaningful HTML. What does it mean? What is meaningful HTML? Should we use like these semantic HTML tags, like paragraphs and headers and tables? Is that meaningful HTML? I don't know. Everybody has a different opinion. But what, of course, the goal here is that it should enhance human readability. So when you extract the content and redisplay just a fragment as HTML, that humans can read it, like a table is a table, for example. And of course, the emphasis from the auditors was it should enable basic machine readability at least. So the problem with all of these requirements is that for the content of TextBlock text, there's no standard, right? There's nothing specified. And that's the reason why there's all this uncertainty. And of course, it would be great at least for software vendors and for everyone else if there was maybe some standardization here. But we don't have that yet. So we have to work with what we have. There is different ways to view the content of TextBlock text, right? On the left-hand side, we can see an ESEF report. The glossy version looks like a PDF, right? And then the content has been enhanced by the viewer from XBRL International that can show some additional information, and you can highlight content. You can search for tags, go from one tag to the next, etc. So this is very useful if you're a human being and want to look at the whole report. And it also looks nice, right? It conveys the corporate CI. Then we can see the extracted content in an audit software, for example. In one version, we have the HTML retained. In the upper version, in the lower version, it's just text. The lower version is not really helpful, right? If we look at the US again, here we can see the Edgar renderer, which is, again, a little bit of a different approach. We can see it uses, on the left-hand side, the information from the extension taxonomy, right? All the sections. And you can click on a section, and then you see just the extracted content from this section, and it looks proper, right? At least in a way from the report. And also, again, all of these numbers are detail tagged in addition to that. So this allows, for example, disclosure navigation, and this is, of course, very helpful. But again, as opposed to Europe, we have some basic styling here, but it's not this glossy report that is very, that companies like to use in Europe for these reports. So what can we do to enhance the content? I think the basic thing we can all agree on is to there's the two solutions here, right? You can have all style information inline, like in the US, then everything can be rendered properly when it's extracted. But then again, the file size, in Europe, there was an emphasis on decreasing the file size so that the reports load quicker. But if you have everything inline, then the styles repeat everywhere, and then the file size gets very big and the reports load very slow. If you use global styles, so everything at the beginning of the document, you define all the styles and then just reuse them, then of course the file size goes down a lot. But still what you need to redisplay the content properly is then semantic text, because if you just have diffs and spans, you cannot really do anything with just the extracted content. Depending, but again, what I talked about earlier, it really depends on the use case. How do we want to expand how we want to enhance the content? If we just do a disclosure checklist, don't worry, we don't need to do anything, right? Do we want to display everything in isolation, like just the content of one tag? Then we need semantic text and ideally some sort of inline styling or something else, right? Again, I think right now, most reports are still page-based. That's, I think, an historic thing, right? We still want to print them. I'm not sure everybody is doing that. I think some companies do. So it needs to be on a page, Word, PDF, these things, right? But I'm of the strong opinion that will go away in the next decade. We will have web-first reports because that's where everybody views them, right? On their phone, on their laptop. I don't think there's a lot of people left in 10 years that will go through a printed version of a report. There's some more things I don't want to go into details here. If you want to enhance the performance of your report, there's another working group on rendering performance. I can just recommend everyone to have a look at this. There's a second thing we can do. We can improve the viewers, right? We cannot just improve the content. We can also improve the viewer side. So on the left-hand side, you can see the example from earlier. And on the right-hand side, you can see there is some things you can do in the software to enhance this report. So again, on the left and on the right-hand side, it's the same content, right? Just on the right-hand side, we have the software enhance the report, the way we display it by, for example, removing local styles, by highlighting tables, by removing formatting and things. So there's things that you can do, for example, in audit software to help you navigate the content and display it in a proper way, even when the original is maybe not so nice. There's another version, another possibility. What I showed in the beginning, you can properly render isolated TextBlock content, even when it's based on these complicated PDF conversions, right? In the beginning, there was the notion that this is not possible, right? You cannot do that because the information is not there. But really, in inline XBRL, what the report is the whole package, right? Now we have a report package specification. It used to be the zip file, which has all the information we need to display TextBlock text in their original layout. In the layout it was intended. You just need to look beyond the content from just the extracted tag and have a look at the whole report, which is part of the package, right? And then you can reconstruct the content of a TextBlock tag isolated in the proper design as it was intended. On GitHub, it's one of our developers created that. There's an open source project that everybody can use. It's just a few hundred lines of code. It was not a lot of work. It currently works only for the PDF converter that most of us are using, but it can be easily extended for every other conversion as well. So this is a plugin for the XBRL International viewer. When you just click on a detail, then you can see the information. So I think this is also a good way to improve for the users, how they can use TextBlock text, right? So a quick summary, I think I'm well in time. In TextBlock tagging for us in the last year has been a bit of a challenge in the context of inline XBRL at least. I know it's been used before in plain XBRL for quite a long time. The use cases are not yet clear, but they should actually guide the requirements. So there's a bit of work we need to do. There's different requirements from different stakeholders. And if we think about ESG, for example, it will be much more prominent issue because there's a lot more narrative text in the ESG taxonomy. And this will be more work. There's a small anecdote from, I think auditors are very aware that ESG will be a lot more work for them, right? In Norway, for example, if you listen to a podcast, you get a small advertisement at the beginning, right? And there the Auditors Association now is heavily advertising that, hey, ESG is coming. Then they explain a little bit about what ESG is about. And then it's, hey, this should be audited, shouldn't it? Yes, it should be audited. But it's a lot of work. Yes. So we need more auditors. Please become an auditor now. So they are very aware this is a challenge and they need more people. And we can, I mean, we as software providers and as regulators, I think we can help them to try to minimize the work they need to do. Again, there's currently, sadly, no standard available, but as I said, there's improvements are possible. We can do it both on the content side, but also on the viewer side to make this more accessible and usable for everyone, even though we don't need how this should be used in the future, right? Thank you very much. If you want to add me on LinkedIn, just click the QR code. Otherwise, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Janis?
So as you pointed out, it's not a tremendously difficult problem to reconstruct the original appearance of the text block simply by inlining the global styles or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what your open source tool is doing, but it must be something like that, right? But I was talking with the presenter from the SEC earlier about, is anyone ever actually looking at the extracted text block content outside of the inline viewer? And she was kind of going, yeah, I don't think so. So it's, like, do you know of usages of people actually doing that? Oh, Herman, why can
comment to that. What was shown on the screen before was the Edgar renderer next to that. Go back a couple more, and that actually is using the text block and the embedded style in it. A couple more back there. So what's on the right is the Edgar renderer is showing the actual text block with the style that was in it. It's not recreating style for it. And that's why these markups are humongously large with the embedded style.
As we
but there are
reconstructed here rather.
No, they're not reconstructing it. There are a bunch of US tools that take the text block and then plop that thing into a viewer pane. And because it has the embedded style, that's why that stuff works.
I know, but you could do that anyway. It doesn't really matter, right? Like the viewer could handle that problem. It's not an issue, right? But like, what scenario could you not handle it for?
Exactly.
Right. Well, so for even this. So, like, who is anyone even looking at the SEC viewer still? Really? Like, really? Why on earth? Like, why not just look at the inline? What?
Because of historical reasons, or maybe they're hysterical now. That's what people look at. But many people ask, why do we still have that? Why don't they go straight to the inline?
Right.
It's probably a nice question to ask Dr. David, because it would be political and throwing their babies in the river.
But I think even in this case, like that they mentioned that open source code, like you could modify the SEC viewer backend to appropriately reconstruct the text block to look how it originally was. Now, as you pointed out, the SEC is probably not going to be super happy about that idea, but it could be done anyway. Although I think I'm taking up too much time with this question. So,
Janis, do you want to have any input on that one?
Well, I mean, it's part of the presentation, right? It's a question that we still have to answer, right? Is somebody doing that? It's a good question. I don't know.
So speaking with John Turner, I'm certainly aware that there are analyst tools that do exactly that and put text blocks side to each other so they can compare. There you go. People in the room doing it. Well, I think that's what we. Yeah. Alex, Lewis, you were first.
So we were just chatting here, and I think I got the answer to my question. But just to confirm, I've always been a little bit puzzled by the difference between Europe and the U.S. market in terms of the glossy. There's this emphasis in Europe about the glossy, highly stylized report. But we have the same thing in the US market. It's just not part of the filing,
Okay.
right? So, if you look at a Microsoft report or any, large company, you've got a highly stylized report. It's just not part of the TK or the Q. It's a separate thing that you find on their website. I don't even think they submit it as an exhibit, right? So that is one of the differences, and it comes down to what the regulatory requirements.
Exactly. Yeah, because
But our companies have just as much ego as European companies.
Yeah. No. But in Europe, it's, as you said, it's the requirement, right? The inline XBRL report is your annual report, right? And the PDF is just something that you can do if you want to. But ideally, the inline XBRL report is your representation, and then it should look proper, right?
That in Europe, that's actually dependent on the country. We have some countries here which accept the XBRL, the inline XBRL, as the main document, as the document everything is based on. The highly stylized. If it's highly stylized or not, it doesn't change. That's basically the main document that's submitted. And other countries like Germany, of course, they use a document model, which have the PDF as a primary document, and then have the zip file and the ESEF reporting as a secondary, just that has to match the original file. But it doesn't have to match in style-wise, but the companies want it to, of course.
Well, we don't really have time for another question, but Alex, did you have one more?
Yeah, just a short one, I think, because you mentioned file size and the inline styling affecting the file size, and that's true. But if you test it a bit, you see that having inline styling doesn't really increase the size by a lot. It's mostly the images, and especially if you have a PDF file that was made with the intention to print it, where you need 600 dpi or something, where on the web. Online, it doesn't even make sense to have images in that good quality. Maybe we should focus more, and let inline styling be there, and focus more on getting the image quality down, because it doesn't really serve a purpose. Or use something like SVG formatting instead of JPEG or PNG, because it's maybe also decreases the file size.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at, reports that are created from PDF often have like 40, 50, 80 megabytes if they're extracted. And if you look at reports that are created from Word, for example, they can also look nice, right? And they have a lot less, 3 megabytes maybe.
The images, they are not always. I mean, PDF to XHTML, the mechanical conversion, just the sheer amount of styling you get. It varies from report to report, but some of them are individually pixel positioning every single letter.
Yes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
It's just because of the quirk of what's happening.
Compared to native XHTML, of course, it's way bigger than it should be.
But quite often, a quick way to play file size is just stick a stupidly big file image in there, and people do that as well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can easily go from 10 megabytes to 100 megabytes just by making better quality images.
So or the base 64 encoding is also
It doesn't matter.
So from a machine readable perspective, why do all of that? I mean, if you're consuming these text blocks to do analysis, how is that relevant?
Well, that's just in the inline.
Well, first
this
of
is
all,
this is this feature of my inline is incredibly pretty because it is the report.
Yeah.
As opposed to.
And I want to win a prize with it.
We experimented with putting proper semantic HTML in my next like proper paragraphs, proper tables, everything done according to, and we got a lot of pushback because it enforces a lot of restrictions on you, right? Like you can do so many things in PDF or InDesign that cannot be accommodated in HTML, right? Like you mentioned, individually positioning each character. Yeah, the reason that happens is because HTML doesn't support varying character spacing, whereas PDF does. So, yeah, I don't know what the answer is here, but as you say, maybe it's just forget about the whole bloody thing.
So,
XML, and then the thing actually works on the web viewer and ends up looking slightly different on the page because it fits on because the screen isn't the size of the page. It gives you a better viewer experience, but the auditors complain that it's not exactly as it looks on the page.
Well, yeah, when you try to tell someone you can't use a varying space character font, they'll freak out on you, right? Like, what do you mean?
so I think we're seeing we're seeing once again that text block tagging is a very, very hot topic, and I'm confident that we could carry on this discussion for at least another hour and 3/4.
Yes.
Which is absolutely fine because it's lunchtime now, so we can continue that discussion for an hour and 3/4 over lunch. So please join me in thanking Janis.